Everybody, and thank you for attending this presentation. My apologies that I am online. I was hoping for an earlier slot in the day because I'm based in Australia, so the time difference means that my slot would have been very early in the morning over here, and as I've committed to not flying, it wasn't possible to be there in person. So I'm doing this presentation online, pre-recorded. I'm doing it with Professor Susanna Becken, who gave you the keynote this morning, and Dr. Stefan McCaskill, who is our postdoc research fellow. I also have to acknowledge Christopher Warren, who was probably the biggest influence on this research project and who continues to be an inspiration in this work and for me personally. So the topic of the presentation is the individual in sustainability interventions. Is she or he worth the effort? And this comes from research that actually Susanna mentioned in her keynotes, where we focus on the individual as a key part in the sustainability puzzle, and we often get very strong pushback from reviewers saying that that is not the place to focus because it's probably the least effective place to focus on sustainability, and I am not sure that I agree with that. So to explore this topic, I'm going to draw on three different themes. The first theme is a matrix which was developed by Ives et al. And published in 2020, which looks at where research to date in sustainability has placed its focus. So as you can see, it's 2 dimensions, 4 quadrants, anchored by, on the horizontal level, individual to collective, and on the vertical level, external to internal, which gives you these 4 quadrants that we'll talk about in a second. The second theme that I draw on, or that we draw on in this presentation, is Meadows' interventions points. So if you're familiar with Meadows' works, she was one of the co-authors of the Limits to Growth reports, and one of the original thinkers in systems thinking, and she developed 12 different intervention points where you might put your attention if you want to change the dynamics of a system. So we're going to map those 2 things onto each other, and then we're going to map our own research onto both of those themes. And our own research is a project on resource conservation in tourist accommodation, so water, energy, etc., and how we design interventions to try and get guests to reduce their resource use. I guess the overarching theme, though, of this presentation is the question of what if sustainability were actually a matter of consciousness. Now, this idea of consciousness and problems like sustainability is not new. You might recognize this quote by Albert Einstein, that no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. So we do there is a very strong theme that we'll get to in this matrix, that we sort of tend to rely on either technology to solve our problems, or we tend to rely on experts to solve our problems, both of which fall into that external quadrant. So either external collective, or which are the experts, or external individual, which might be the technology which can be applied to ourselves as an individual. I'm not quite sure that that's going to cut it, and we'll sort of explore why. If you're thinking why the focus on consciousness, so consciousness is defined as the hard problem in science. It's not understood. We don't have an idea. We don't have a fixed idea or a firm understanding of where consciousness even sits. I've put up some of the areas where consciousness sort of makes big appearances. There's been recent publications sort of in the last couple of months that have said that we cannot place consciousness in the brain or in the mind. There's strong evidence that says that when somebody is technically brain dead, they still have an awareness of what might be happening around them if they've got the sort of what's called a near-death experience. So there's emerging research in the medical space that has very surprising results around consciousness. In that same theme of where does it sit, what is it exactly, there's a lot of research in quantum physics that is asking bigger and bigger questions about dark matter and dark energy. So it looks like the non-material but still highly influential aspects of reality far outweigh or are a far bigger proportion of what exists than the material that we can touch and feel, measure, etc. And that's coming out through the quantum physics sciences in dark matter and dark energy, which poses really big questions for our models of rationality and materialism and reductionism, etc. This type of thinking might be foreign to Western cultures, but it's certainly not foreign to over 2 billion citizens around the world that might be sort of sitting in Eastern philosophies or indigenous thinking, and that have a much more kind of daily grasp of consciousness through their understanding of spirituality in daily practices. So it might be foreign to us in the West, but it's not something that's not mainstream in general. The science of ecology is definitely revisiting its notions around what is an individual and do individuals compete or cooperate. There's more and more research now sort of suggesting that cooperation is the foundation of how systems work. And it's getting harder and harder when a scientist, ecologists dig down to sort of even separate out exactly what is an individual. So if you think about sort of your gut biome and how your gut biome might influence your moods or your weight gain or that kind of thing, you know, is your gut biome part of you or is it separate to you? Those kinds of things. Psychology is doing wonderful things with mindfulness and psychedelics. There's strong evidence that suggests, for instance, that people that take psilocybin, so magic mushrooms, have a much more pro-sustainability stance and are much more willing to explore sustainability initiatives. So there's strong links there between sort of consciousness and sustainability as well. And then obviously one of the big areas that a lot of people are concerned about is artificial intelligence, and would artificial intelligence become conscious? Is it conscious? Does it have the capacity to be conscious? So these are all posing really big questions for our very traditional scientific Western reductionist rational paradigm. Some of you might be aware that the Nobel Prize winners last year, I think it was, or 2 years ago, sort of questioned or disproved, I guess, local realism and that kind of thing. So really big questions are being raised about how we understand the world around us and the place of consciousness within it. So I think it is worth bringing in to the sustainability debate. So let's go back to that first theme around where sustainability research has taken place, according to this matrix. And like I said, a lot of it has been focused on technology. So for instance, maybe smart meters, sustainable technology, SAFs were mentioned this morning, for instance. So hydrogen power, electric cars, those types of things, Internet of Things, so all of those types of things that might drive towards sustainability. There's been a lot of research on policies and systems, nudging, that kind of thing. And then coming down slightly down the list, we start to find grassroots movements, maybe social norms. If you're familiar with research done in hotels around calorie hanging, it often focuses on social norms. The least amount of work has been done on the individual, according to Ives et al., and partly because I think there's probably a bit of pushback from reviewers on that, and partly because they're seen as not being the most effective place to do research. I would actually put consciousness, we often understand consciousness is sitting at the level of the individual, so I would put consciousness in that quadrant. And I would actually say that it probably is the foundation for the other areas, the types of technology that we consider appropriate. We're seeing that very much in the AI space now, the types of policies that we want to design, the types of governance decisions that we make. I feel like it does come down to a matter of consciousness, and it's quite pertinent in my own sort of life journey as I delve more and more into areas of permaculture and that kind of thing, is really sort of trying to understand how I relate to the world around me, and this idea of literacy and understanding the systems around me and my interactions with the systems around me. And I do think that does come down to an element of consciousness in it. So that's the first theme. The second theme is Meadows' intervention points. She goes from what she calls shallow intervention points down to the deeper leverage points, the deeper intervention points. And when you look at the shallower ones, we'll map them onto each other in a second, but they do tend to sort of be in that more technocratic space. So benchmarks, indicators, targets, those types of things. Whereas the bottom ones, number 1 and number 2, tends to be mindset. And again, I would argue that the mindset, whether collective or individual, is that matter of consciousness and the paradigm out of which a system operates. So if we map those two onto each other, what I would argue that we find is that the higher level ones, so the shallower ones, the ones number 1, etc., do tend to sit in that external facing quadrants of the matrix. So constants, etc., tends to be around parameters, numbers, benchmarks tend to be around policies that we set, structure of information flows. So just a very simple example around smart meters, smart technology tends to be in that technology area, and that tends to be kind of middling in her intervention points. The collective, so number 4 in Meadows' list, is the power to change, to add change and self-organize system structures. So that's sort of sitting in the middle. And the number 1 and number 2, which is the mindset and the power to transcend paradigms. So I've put a picture of a Buddhist there because the power to transcend paradigms is actually kind of related to non-attachment and not buying into a particular paradigm as being the answer. So reductionism or whatever being the answer to our problems, but sort of being able to transcend that and seeing it from a much higher level. Okay, so then we get to the third theme. So we're going to take those first 2 themes and then we're going to map onto those first 2 themes what we have been doing in our own research. So our own research was a project called Persuading Tourists to Use Fewer Resources, which was funded by the Australian Research Council. It's based on the idea of conserving resources, so not efficiency, but actually getting people to use less. And we do this through a 3-pronged approach by working with hosts, with guests, and with the building management. So we will use technology, we will install smart meters, etc., within the building management technology. But a lot of our work is with hosts and building up literacy with hosts so that they can flow that through to the guests and how they interact with guests. We work with partners from a wide range of backgrounds, from big metropolitan hotels to sort of cabins in national parks. And as anybody who's worked in this space knows, there's endless challenges when you're working with partners and technology and sustainability. So what we found, we did a retrospective audit of the types of interventions that we were using in our own research, trying to get guests to use fewer resources, so electricity, water, gas, that kind of thing. And so we mapped it out according to the parameters. So we went, okay, according to the intervention points that Meadows has. So for each of her 12 intervention points, we audited what we had done and we said, are any of our intervention points related to this level of intervention suggested by Meadows? So we mapped these out according to Meadows' intervention points, then we mapped these out according to the matrix. And I'm just putting up a few examples and I can talk very, very briefly through the examples, but the main takeaway point from this slide is that actually we also focused around the 3 quadrants that are not the individual. So for parameters, for the top ones, parameters, the shallower ones, parameters, etc. Numbers, parameters, we use metrics such as energy use per night, what is the most efficient air conditioning, temperature settings, those kinds of things. For number 11, for increasing the size of buffers, we redesigned experiences around low carbon activities, so maybe stargazing at night, bicycle rides and picnics, trying to sort of in that buffer, trying to minimize high carbon activities and go for lower carbon activities. In technology, we looking at material stocks, so we encouraged better use of solar panels. We helped businesses replace their batteries to be more efficient batteries. We replaced heaters with blankets. So we sort of played around with what sort of infrastructure and what material stocks they had. Length of delays, so our partner Christopher Warren and his Myri Butler, one of the things that they do, for instance, is they send information on the weather, on the expected weather pre-trip, so that you can pack appropriately, and you reduce the length of delay of information getting back to you so that you don't arrive on site and realize that you've packed cool weather clothes for warm weather and you need to put on the air conditioning, those types of things. So you can keep going back. So we use negative feedback loops, so smart meters that show when people are overusing resources. Positive feedback loops, we told people that we were donating, which is true, we were donating, the businesses would donate any savings that they made to a charitable cause to do with sustainability. So you can keep going, and what you see is that the area that we focused on the least is that paradigm change. And we focused on it the least because it's the hardest to do. It really requires people slowing down. It really requires a very deep, high-level engagement with businesses, with the individuals involved. It means that they have to engage quite deeply with their guests, understand their guests' needs. Christopher can talk about this more than I can. It's not off-the-shelf technocratic solutions. It's really developing literacy, developing a sense of place, all the things that Susanna was talking about when she was talking about regenerative tourism and regenerative literacy. So that's sort of where that paper came from. And it's the hardest area, and we did it probably the least. So coming back to the central question, is it worth focusing on the I in research? When people challenge me on this and say, no, it's not, I often think it's because they're coming from a particular paradigm that says the individual is just a small cog in a large machine. So what effect can they have? And that is a paradigm. And we're talking about changing the paradigm. And so when you look at the more holistic, it's often associated with Indigenous thinking. It's often associated with those that talk about decolonizing our thinking. Holistic systems thinking, then you start talking about strange attractors, the butterfly effect, feedback loops, those types of things. And it's a very different way of thinking. So yes, perhaps when you're looking at deterministic and linear, maybe the I is not worth focusing on. But when you're switching that paradigm to a systems thinking, to strange attractors, to butterfly effects, etc., then perhaps the I is worth thinking about. So just as always, some limitations and then a couple of references for you if you're interested in. This is a thought exercise. It was an audit of our own research. Does it actually work? We don't know yet. Like I said, consciousness is the hard problem in science, so it's kind of difficult to say what it is exactly, where it resides, what it looks like, who has it. Do animals have it? Do plants have it? Do minerals have it? You know, that's all the hard problem in science. There probably is a publication bias in this area, so we said that the matrix had reviewed where publications sat, and there is a strong pushback from reviewers looking at the individual. I haven't actually seen strange attractors work in tourism. I don't know if they work. If anybody has any evidence of that, I'd be very interested. And then, of course, AI is going to be sort of the big issue that we're going to be faced with. So thank you for your attention. And if there's any questions, I'm sure Christopher would be very capable and willing to answer them on our behalf. Thank you.